You all know him as Dr. Pruitt. He delivers babies. But you may not know that he grew up in Iowa. Now, many people think that Iowa is a city in Idaho. It is not. All right. He went to Harding University, actually graduated, went on to medical school at UAB here in Birmingham. Became a Navy submarine officer. That is the top of the surface. That is the pick of the litter. And then,
actually, it's under the water, not on top of the surface.
Oh, that's true. I said top of the service.
Oh, okay.
Okay, all right. He also played basketball and baseball in college.
High school.
He played in high school too.
Not in college.
He didn't do well in baseball or basketball.
There you go.
There you go. Just in.
Yeah.
Okay. Look, I'm supposed to tell this.
Well, you got to tell it right then.
It's hard. Okay. He is married to the lovely and saintly Jan. All right. Now, this is an interesting story because they were friends in high school.
College.
Oh, it was college. All right. Does this happen at home? Okay. And he called her up, never dated. He called her up and said, hey, let's get married. And she said, yes. All right. And then the rest of the story, Caroline in law school, Elizabeth teaching, Jackson, UAB, and working, and Brooks is in Hoover as a junior. Mm-hmm. All right. And some of those wonderful children are right here with us this morning.
I'm Elizabeth.
Yeah. We have a truth problem sometimes in the family. Okay. Help me welcome a man who spent more time underwater than most of us spent going to high school, Dr. Brian Pruitt.
Good morning. Today we're going to talk about time. So you turn to Psalms 90, verse 12. Some of you were in a class that I gave a couple weeks ago on a Wednesday night. We were talking about self-control was the subject on Wednesday night. You guys know we meet on Wednesday night for class? We have class on Wednesday night here. And so we were having a series on self-control, and I was given the subject of how we spend our time. Actually, it was called Weaning Off of Entertainment was my title, but I changed it around a little bit to talk about time. So some of this, if you were there for those sessions, some of this will be a little bit of review, but I think for the most part, it will be, I said that night, this is the most important lesson I ever taught, ever. So you shouldn't be surprised that I'm teaching it again. So if you were here, I apologize if you hear something that you've heard once before. So Psalms 90, verse 12. Psalms 90 is a psalm written by Moses, according to the scriptures, the heading there. And verse 12 says, teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Now, this presents some issues. How are we to understand this, ordering our days aright, and what does it mean to gain a heart of wisdom, and the fact that we need to be taught these things. These are all points that we're going to bring up here today. I think about time a lot, and I suppose most of us do. We're constrained by the limits of the day and the amount of stuff that we have to get done. And I don't know if you've noticed, those of you who are a little older, the pace has increased. What it used to be like to what it is now is not necessarily the same. It's kind of like there's that old movie it's from Iowa actually, which says, if you build it, they will come. It's about a baseball field in a cornfield. If you build it, they will come. And have you noticed that if you build more lanes on the highway, it just fills up with cars? Have you noticed that? And if you just give yourself more, make things easier, like it's not as hard to prepare a meal as it once was, or do all those kind of things. If you make things a little easier on yourself, you just fill it up with something else. So it's not like all the time-saving things that have developed over the last 100 years have really done anything to make our lives any easier. They're just filled up with more stuff. All right. So time is a real pressure that we feel, and the ability to use it well. Some of us get the sense that if we don't figure this out, we're going to end up in a place that we don't like. That we're just kind of run over by the day rather than having any control over it. So time is an important thing for all of us. In this particular passage, Moses, throughout this entire psalm, is dealing with the notion of time, and he feels very strongly that all of our time is given to us by God. In verse 4, or verse 3, you turn men back to dust, saying, return to dust, O sons of men. So the whole notion of death is a gift from God also to men, that all of our time is spent under God's eye, so to speak. So the way that we spend our time is very important. And so Moses says in verse 12, teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. All right, so some issues that come up from this passage. If we're to number our days rightly, that means we have to have some sort of notion of where our day should go, right? We have to have some sort of sense of where we're headed with our day if we're going to be able to number them rightly, to order them in a certain way. The question I see him posing is, how do we order our lives to some sort of end in a way that, and that end in this passage is to gain a heart of wisdom. So, the problem that Moses is laying out for us here is how can we learn to order our days correctly so that we can achieve some spiritual goal? All right? So, let's talk about spiritual goals briefly. Turn to Psalms 27:4. If you've ever been in a class that I've taught, this verse comes up a lot. It's one of my favorites, and is actually one that I sense as maybe one of the key passages in the entire scriptures is this passage here, because it shows a man, in this case David, who is clear about his spiritual goal, the one thing that he wants. Now most of us probably feel that the problem that we have with ordering our time is that life kind of takes us in lots of directions. And it's hard for us to say, there's one thing that I want. Because by the time you say there's one thing that you want, something else pops up that is vying for your attention and for your efforts. So it's hard to order our lives to any one particular thing. And David is saying here that is possible. We may even think it's impossible to order your life towards one thing because of all the requirements that we have on us. But David is saying in this passage, there's one thing that he wants, and it is this. One thing I ask the Lord, and this is what I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple. Now I take this not to be poetic language. I take this to be a fact of David's life. That this is what David really, really wants. And that whenever he was doing anything else, he always thought, this is what I want to be doing. And I want to order my life to this reality, that I'm going to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord. And so this would be, I take to be the end of our existence. The spiritual end is that we would somehow be able to spend our life, every bit of it, every moment of it, in some way gazing upon the beauty of the Lord and being in his presence. So, that's the baseline text that I use. Some other things that point to this, if you turn to 1 Timothy 6:11, in this case, hold your finger in Psalms, because we'll be back in a second. Or you can just listen, it doesn't matter. 1 Timothy 6:11, you're aware of, before that passage, in Timothy, Paul is writing to a young minister, encouraging him in the faith, that he's supposed to act a certain way as he grows up, to not neglect the gift that's been given to him, to pay attention to the scriptures, all the kinds of things you tell a young man to do. And so in 1 Timothy 6:11, right before that, in the earlier parts of that chapter, he's talking about money and the love of money. And that famous verse, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So that's in that chapter as well. But he says, but flee from all this, the pursuit of money, the pursuit of wealth. Flee from all this and rather pursue righteousness and godliness and faith and love and endurance and gentleness. Those are the things that you're supposed to pursue. Rather than pursuing the things of this world and its desire, you're supposed to pursue something else. Now, to pursue something reflects, if you move, it means a movement towards something. If you do that, then there's some love involved. No matter what you pursue, whatever it is that you are wanting, there's some sort of sense of, well, I love that in a certain kind of way. I desire that. And so as was pointed out, I pursued my wife. All right, so not with any time in before, but just at the time, I said, I'm going to pursue my wife. And so because I loved her, and so I pursued that. In the same way, Paul is encouraging Timothy to not pursue gain, financial gain, but rather to pursue things of God, to show that he oriented his life in that way to show a love The next passage I'll use as a witness to this notion of spiritual ends is Psalms 1. In Psalm 1, you remember this passage begins something like this. Blessed is the man. All right, so blessed is happy. Happy. He is happy is the man who does not. He starts off with doing things he does not do. Sit in the council of the wicked, sit in the seat of mockers, those kind of things. But then he says what he does do. He says, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on that law he meditates day and night. All right, now I take this also. I take all these verses not in any poetic way, but in the truth of things. That this is what the man wants to do. This is what a man of God does. He flees from the things of this world in order to pursue the things of God. He only wants one thing, to be in the presence of God, and that if he could, day and night, he would meditate on the law of God, because that's where he finds his happiness. His happiness is his mind-centered, his life-centered, his love's directed all towards God. So, in Psalms 27:4, we have one thing. If we're talking about spiritual ends, we have one thing that we want, and that's to be in the presence of God. We need to pursue God through love, and we need to do this day and night. Now, I take this as what's on these kind of notions are what's in Moses' mind when he says, teach us to number our days aright that we may gain a heart of wisdom. How are we going to organize our days to pursue these ends? How do we set up our time? How do we think about life? What do we do in order to get ourselves to the point where we want one thing, where we pursue one thing, and where we do this day and night? Now, obviously through the scriptures, you can see all through that man has been unable to do this very well. I mean, this is not be a surprise to you that this is not the easiest thing in the world to do, but I do take it as not only just an ideal end, but a true end that can be pursued, and that we should order our lives towards its pursuit. This is what we should want. Now, as I said, this has been a problem all through scriptures. Particularly, I think it's a problem today. And if it isn't particularly now, we'll talk about how it is now. There's a guy that, has anyone heard of the man named Thomas Merton? Okay, a handful of you. Okay, Thomas Merton. That's all right. It doesn't matter.
You tell us about it.
Yeah. Because I've told you before about Thomas Merton. Yeah. So Thomas Merton was a Catholic monk in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. He died in the 60s, and he's actually kind of a famous, which is weird for a monk, that a monk would be famous, but he is. And he wrote lots of books, and there's a quote that I read one time that stuck with me. In fact, I wrote it in the front of my Bible so that it wouldn't forget it. And it goes something like this. And he writes this about 1950. It says, though man has gained the ability to do almost anything, he has at the same time lost the ability to orient his life towards a spiritual goal by the things that he does. So man has acquired the capacity to do almost anything, but at the same time lost the ability to orient his life towards a spiritual goal by the things that he does. And he sensed that this was particularly a modern problem. Now, as I said, all through scriptures, it's been hard for people to flee from the pursuit of wealth, to pursue God. It's that everybody's got disordered desires, they're deceitful, all that. So this is not just a new problem, but there's something about the way the world is set up now, the way we think about, the way we engage it, the way we participate in it, the way it presents itself to us, that makes it particularly hard for us to orient our life towards a spiritual goal by the things that we do. So, you can either take that as a special notion of what it is today, and I think it'd be worthwhile for those of you who like to think about these kind of things, to try to figure out exactly why that is, what is special about our times that makes this difficult. I would say that the orientation part is what's hard. Perhaps you might think that the problem is not that we're just not strong enough, that if we just did better, we could do this. But I think that there's whole patterns of thought that prevent this from happening. We just can't imaginatively fit ourselves in the world. Think about a agrarian society where you have to worry about when it rains, are the crops going to get in at the right time, all those kind of things. You think about childbirth, something that I do on a daily basis. If you look back at the Book of Common Prayer written in 1600, which is the Anglicans, where we get things like the way we do a marriage and things, they all come from the Anglican Book of Common Prayer. That's where all that comes from. And so if you go in there, there's a big long section on the prayer for thanksgiving for a woman who's made it through childbirth. Okay, so there's a huge deal to make it through childbirth. And now, if you don't make it through childbirth, it's a huge deal. Okay, so just the notion that we don't depend on God as much for these kind of things as we used to is part of the issue. That we have gained the ability to do almost anything. Walk in the grocery store and get a loaf of bread and not have to bake it. But at the same time, we've lost the order of our lives to our spiritual goal by the things that we do. Okay, does this make sense to you? Okay. All right, so the question then is, how do we go about fixing this problem? We got these lofty, I would say, spiritual goals that I've tried to put up there to tell you the truth about, I think, how things are. That this is really what it is. And it's not just, and at the same time say it's not just weakness, it's not just inability, it's not just, it just didn't do well enough, but we just can't think about this in the right way. That we can't even begin to imagine how we'd fit into a world today whereby we could orient our lives toward a spiritual goal by the things that we do. All right. So this is a problem. And then, so now to be good and practical, we get to a solution. Now, the solution, I think, is we got to change the way we think. Not just change the things that we do, but we got to change the way that we think about the world and everything. So, we're going to look at a couple of verses. One from 1 Peter 2, verses 2 and 3. It says in that passage, like newborn babies crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good. All right, so the point I want to make here is that what Peter is telling these Christians is that they need to crave. Now, crave is not a word that we typically use. We run by it. We just read it. Crave. Okay, yeah. Crave pure spiritual milk. But the point is, if we're going to overcome this problem of disorientation that we have and somehow be able to pursue spiritual goals, we're going to have to get into our head and our thought and our practices, everything that we do, that we're supposed to crave God. That we're supposed to crave Him. Not just go to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. Even not just, follow certain sort of rules or a certain kind of morality. That's not the end. The end is that we're supposed to desire this. The man, remember, the guy in Psalms 1, day and night. Day and night. Who has spent the time, any significant amount of time in Psalms 119? Psalms 119? It's in your Bibles. 176 verses. 176 verses about the law. 176 verses about the law, over and over and over and over. And what does he say? I love the law. I love the law. You have taught me. Keep me pure. How can a young man keep his way pure? By living by the light, by living by your word. I run in the paths of your commands, for you have set my heart free. All these verses about the law. Here's a man who's able, or woman, I don't know, who is able to write 176 verses of poetry about the law. And we can't come to class on Wednesday night. Okay? Because we don't crave. We don't desire. We're not lined up. We're too busy. We got other things on our mind. The whole way that we think about the world is not ordered towards the pursuit of God. We're pursuing other things, whatever they might be. But here's a man in Psalms 1 who meditates on the law day and night. Here's Paul telling Timothy, we spend our time pursuing money, which is we have to do a little bit. But he says, no, don't do that. Pursue godliness, pursue righteousness, pursue gentleness. Who pursues gentleness? Pursue gentleness. That's what he's telling. So the message of Scriptures and the way we live is totally different. And so if we're going to correct the problem, we have to crave, we have to desire, we have to want, we have to yearn, we have to need. But we don't need. That's the whole problem. We don't think that we need. We got it all figured out. We're not humble about these kind of things. We think, well, okay, well, I know this. Yeah, okay, what can they teach me? What can I learn new? I mentioned Thomas Merton. There's years probably that, anything Catholic is kind of taboo to bring up any other kind of religion, as if we can't learn from them. As if we can't learn from somebody who might be more spiritual than we are. So the point I'm trying to make is that there's a certain amount of humility that's necessary in order to even believe me when I say that we've lost our ability to orient ourselves to a spiritual goal and that we need to crave. All right, so back to Psalms 90, verse 12. Moses senses this issue and he says, first, teach us. Okay, so it's not you guys figure it out and orient your life, but he says, teach us to number our days right. So the first thing to know about this whole process I'm trying to talk about in the brief amount of time I have is that it's got to be prayerful. The whole notion about orienting your life towards a spiritual goal requires that you say to God, God, orient my life towards a spiritual goal. We mentioned Psalms 119 a minute ago. All through Psalms 119, there's passages where he just says, God, you have done this. God, you have taught me. I'm wiser than my elders because you have taught me. I know more than my teachers because you have directed my path. All these kind of things. So the notion that you're going to orient your life is because God has taught you to orient your life. So it requires prayerful humility in order to do this. So we have to have our desires ordered, and we need to be taught by God. Another passage along this line, James 4, verses 4 through 8, you know, where he talks about, you adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world is hatred towards God? You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world is hatred towards God? And then he says, but God gives you more grace. Don't you know that the Spirit He gives you envies intensely? And then he says, don't be double-minded. We're back to this single-mindedness that we talked about in Psalms 27. James 4 is the opposite. Adulterous, lovers of the world, double-minded, as opposed to the single-minded man who wants one thing, to dwell in the house of the Lord all days of life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek Him in His temple. Okay, so those are the differences that we're trying to distinguish. But the point here in James 4 is that it's a grace. God gives us a grace. He gives His Spirit in order that He can envy intensely that we would want this. All right? Okay, so I've tried to say that there's the issue of time that Moses recognized, that there are spiritual goals that we should be directing our lives to. Primarily it is, I guess for lack of a better word, union with God, fellowship with God, being in God's presence. It's Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all you who labor, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for my yoke is easy, my burden is light. So I will give you rest for your souls. You can take your rest in me. That's our spiritual goal we're talking about. It's something we should pursue day and night. We need to be taught by God, and it requires that we order our desires. Okay? So the question then is, how do we go about doing this? How do we go about changing, reorienting our life? All right? So now the practical part. So certain practices that we might entertain that might help us to do this. And at the end here, I'm going to give you a gift. All right? So that you guys can start passing out the gift. If you promise not to look at it till it's time. So, all right. So the first thing to think about, it comes up under meditation. Okay, so the gift that comes up then. So we can talk about those stuff first. All right, so certain practices. One, the first thing to do is recognize that the time that you have itself, the time you have is a gift. That God has given you life. And the point of this life that He's given you is that you would enjoy Him. As someone once said, our hearts are restless till they find their rest in Thee.
Hey, I've been resisting interrupting at so many points because you said so much great stuff that I want to respond to. First there, what you just said about why He gave us life. I think we've often heard we live to bring glory to God, like we're workers to spread the gospel. And our purpose, we've often been told
I'm trying to find the right place. I'm listening. You're told what? Go ahead.
our purpose is to work for God, to be, to servants, to be, working in the kingdom and doing and bringing people to Him and bringing Him glory. And you just said our purpose was to love Him. And I don't know that that's a difficult step to make when all your life you've been told your purpose is to work for Him.
Yeah, so I thought about bringing up the passages in the parables. There's a couple of parables that speak to this, that have numbers involved, and we're numbers people, and so we latch on to this numbers aspect. So the parable of the soils. You know, the good soil produces a crop, 30, 60, and 90-fold. And then you had the parable of the talents. We had the 5-talent guy, the 2-talent guy, the 1-talent guy, and the 5-talent guy invests and gets 5 talents more. So those kind of notions drive us. We think that way. We think competitively. We think numbers. We think outcomes, tangible outcomes that we can measure. That's where we kind of think about things. And those verses, those parables, lend themselves to that kind of thought. That we think, okay, we have to produce. But then you got this passage like Ephesians 6. All right, Ephesians 6, where you get the armor of God, right? And so he says, why you put on the armor of God? So you can stand. It's the whole point. To stand. Not to do, but just to be able to stand. Now that you've done all these things, to stand. All right, so I think that a qualitative way of thinking about it rather than a quantitative way helps us. But again, our lives, our habits of thought are oriented towards production. We're oriented towards outcomes. But love is the main thing. So the whole, I mean, what does Jesus say? You got to take verses and say, these are the ones I'm going to hang my hat on. And I hang my hat on Psalms 27, and I hang my hat on Matthew 11, where it says, come to me and I will give you rest. That's the point. The point of the spiritual life is to get your rest in God. Now, along the way, as you get your rest in God, then you will do all things for the glory of God. You will, of course, it's not to negate those other things, but the end is to love God and be in His presence. This is Jesus in John 17:3. Now, this is eternal life. Now, this is going to raise your attention, right? He's going to tell you what it is. And what does He say? That they know God and know Christ. Okay? So,
be in relation with Him.
Exactly. So that is the point. Psalms 27, one thing to be in the presence of God. All right, so that we have this time. That's a great point, Joe. Appreciate that. We have this time that's given to us as a gift that we can live. Now, when you think about if your time is a gift, then there's certain notions that kind of present themselves to you. The first is that what we've been talking about, which is there's a certain way to use the time. Now, what I want to suggest, the first way that we need to change the way we think is that all time is God's. Okay? And especially the time when you're not directly committed to the mundane things of your life. Now, what those mundane things are vary for everybody. But all of us sleep and eat, and most of us work. And the degree of work varies. Jabbo has to do lots of extracurricular things, I'm sure. Go to dinners, go to meetings, things that I don't have to do. But that's part of his mundane existence. He has to do those kind of things. Other of you have to go to school board meetings. There's things that we have to do that are part of our lives in the community. But then we have all that other time. All the other time where we don't have to do that. And that's the first, and that time is really the time where you can pursue God purposefully. All right? So, you have all this time that you're given, or what we call free time perhaps, and that's the time where you might spend now watching basketball games or watching movies or reading books or hanging out or sitting around talking. Those are all things. None of these things are bad. I don't say anything's bad. I'm just saying that that's your time. That's time I'm talking about. All that free time, all that time can be ordered purposely to God in His pursuit. I call that the virtue of leisure. That there's a good way to use that time and there's a bad way to use that time. And that if we're going to start to get out of our hole of orienting our lives towards spiritual goals, we'd have to start using this time better than what we are. And if we use that time well, then that will make us good and it will fix this problem. We'll be able to pursue these spiritual goals if we start to think about that time. So all time is a gift. It's given to us. Second thing is Sabbath. Mark 2:27 says that Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So, the point of Sabbath, we could do a whole lesson or 2 or 3 on Sabbath, but the whole point of Sabbath is it's a gift to you, to us. It's a gift to us in order that we can rest from our labor for the sake of God, not because we're tired, but for the sake of God, and that it's time set aside to God. It doesn't have to be on a Saturday, it doesn't have to be on a Sunday. There needs to be time whereby you dedicate, you're going to not work because of God, and during that time you are going to purposefully pursue God. That would be the point of Sabbath. So, Sabbath is, in Hebrews 3 and 4, it says a Sabbath rest still exists, right? You know, it says, don't do like you did before. When you test me in the desert, Psalms 95 is this passage that they quote in Hebrews 3 and 4. He says, but a Sabbath rest still remains. So as long as man remains, a Sabbath rest remains. So until the end of time, this notion of a Sabbath rest is still there. What is that rest? That rest is time away from work so you can pursue God. It's the rest of, come to me and I will give you rest. That's the whole point. All right? Joe.
It's such a paradigm change.
That's what I'm telling you. If we're going to orient our lives towards a spiritual goal, we have to get out of the patterns of thinking that we've had. You're right. It's totally different. It's totally different. But I really think that if we're going to correct these problems, if you didn't scoff at, if you're all living this one thing I want and day and night meditating and you're pursuing God, then you've got it. That's fine. I'm giving you practices that are going to help those of us who don't realize about the one thing day and night pursuing godliness. That we can't figure out how to do that. And so I'm giving you practices that might help you in order to do that. These are old practices. They've been around for a long time.
I think your key word here is purposefulness. If we finished college, we had the purpose to do so. Anything we've accomplished in our lives, we had the purpose to do. This also has to be purposeful.
Okay, so time. That's the main thing. Now, how are we going to spend that time? We talked about Sabbath, prayer. Prayer is the most important fundamental thing, period. Prayer. Because prayer is where you ask God to give you the help that you need. Prayer is the time when you are in direct communion with God. And prayer helps to orient your desires. You got these disordered desires. They're deceitful. They throw you off. And prayer helps. So prayer is huge. And if you think about all the prayers, if you want to begin, pray the prayers of Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians. Go through, I think there's 2 in Ephesians, there's 1 in Philippians 1, there's 1 in Ephesians 1, Ephesians 3, Philippians 1, and Colossians 1. Go there, read the prayers of Paul. See what he prays for. See what he asks God for. It's all about spiritual formation. It's all about help me know God better. Help me to love more. That's what it's all about. Okay, so prayer. That's where I would begin. And then all the Psalms are prayer. We'll get to that in a second. Quietness. I had him sing, drop thy still dews of quietness till all our striving cease, because that was important to me. I'm almost done, Russ. And we need quietness, though. Quietness has 2 aspects. There's quietness of the soul itself, which means all those desires that are flowing around and out of order, and you have to get those quiet. But in order to do that, in order to have that peace, you have to also have some sort of quiet, external quiet. Stop the noise, as was said by Dr. Seuss. Okay? All right. So we need to have quietness. And last, we need to have meditation. Meditation is the practice whereby we fill our minds with things that will orient us towards God. Okay? So meditation is time purposely spent so that we can have in our head not the latest rap song that we heard, or not the statistics of the football players, or not how my bracket is doing, but not that those are bad, but the things that we have in our, or what's my stock market doing, even more important, but the things that we have in our head whereby we order our lives to God. Where we think about God, where we think about godly things. How do we go about doing this? Okay, so you all get the gift I gave you. All right. So this is it's a funny thing, I know, but this is Lent. This Lent started on Ash Wednesday, which was 2.5 weeks ago. And during the time of Lent, in my family, we try to give up something as we prepare ourselves for Easter and the remembrance of the resurrected Savior. And so what I gave up this year was time. And I said, I'm going to try to orient, I'm a busy person, do lots of stuff, as you all are, and I was going to take some of my time and I was going to actively pursue meditation more than what I was. All right, so I found this on Amazon. Love Amazon. Amazon Prime is even better. So this is a book called The Psalter. The Psalter is a collection of the Psalms. Okay, it's a translation that's put out by the Greek Orthodox people, and so it's the Septuagint. So it's a little different. But at the back of this Psalter, there's this stuff that I've copied down for you. And what this is a listing of reading the Psalms and how to orient your life around the Psalms. So we're talking about spending our time a different way. So on the you can fold it in half, and that way you can just either cut this back part off once you need it or whatever, but you can fold in half. It says look at the Psalms assigned to the services. So there's different times of the day. You've probably heard these before. There's Vespers, which is evening. There's Compline, which is nighttime. There's the midnight service. There's Matins, which is the middle of the night. Then there's Prime, Terce, Sext, and None. These are the different times of the day. And on my little notes, it explains that to you. And at this time of day, the monks will get up and they'll do these Psalms every single day. It's amazing to think that Psalms 51, which you all know, the one about against you and you only I sinned, after David had his mess with Bathsheba. It was a hot mess. That's what it was. So Psalms 51, they go through like 5 or 6 times a day. It shows how important it is to have the humility associated with the fact that sin is in your life. Okay? So these different Psalms, you should sit down and read Psalms 104 out loud this evening at 6 p.m. It's the most beautiful thing. And read it out loud because it's very moving if you hear it out loud. But, you can pick in here and do what you want as far as how much of these time you do or none at all. But this is just here to show you. And then in this, at the top, the order of reading the Psalter, it says outside of Great Lent, but don't worry about that. The Kathisma, I left these kind of Greek words and I thought they were kind of cool, so I left them. So the Kathisma is a grouping of the Psalms. Like you have 20 different groups, 1 through 8, 9 through 17, etc. And at different times of the day, in the week, they read it. And you'll notice that through the week, they read the entire book. Every week. Every week. Psalms 119, the one I told you about, every single weeknight at midnight service. Every single weeknight at midnight service they read Psalms, they chant Psalms 119.
How long is the service?
I don't know. But you can, if these little services down here, they take about 5 minutes. The ones like Prime, 3rd, 6th, and 9. These others take about 20 minutes to read. It takes about 20 minutes to read them.
The whole service, they just chant?
Chant. Mm-hmm. So if you want to talk to me more about these, I'll be happy to talk to you. I'm running out of time. But I give you this as a gift. We have lots of reading plans, reading the Bible. I like this because it's purposeful. It's about the Psalms. The Psalms are just that kind of orienting your life. I mean, that's what they do. They orient your life towards God. And so this is a way that I found to help us to do that. And I'm out of time. Thank you.